Howdy there, Isaac here, and today we're gonna do something a little different. Power scaling my hero is something I don't see done often, and even when there isn't much hype around it, unlike with Naruto and Dragon Ball. That said, I'd like to throw my hat in the ring with a pretty controversial power scaling of the My Heroes League of Villains. Now, this isn't them during the Force Raid arc. Instead, this is going to be a composite list of the league right after MVA. So, while we're including characters such as Muscular and Magni, we won't be having characters such as Getten or Redestro, since they're technically not a part of the league. We will be using the later forms of the characters up to MVA, as I said. That means we'll be using Toga, who can use the quirks of those she transforms into, instead of her at the Forest Raid, but we'll still be using Moonfish from the Forest Raid arc, since that's all we have of him. I'd like to preface that this is simply how I believe the rankings would go, based on the evidence I've gathered and will be presenting. But there's definitely room for debate amongst these characters. If you have a huge problem with me ranking one character below another, then feel free to leave a comment about why Moonfish solos all of fiction once he uncovers his eyes. With that stated, let's jump right into it with D tier. Coming in at number 11 is Mustard, who, much like Hidan, is the weakest member of his respective group. His stats are lower than everyone else, and even his rank is lower, him categorized as a C rank villain when arrested. His status is further proven by the fact he was the only villain in the league to fight against Class 1B students, who are implied to be inferior to those of Class 1A, especially at this point since 1B has zero experience fighting villains. Mustard is touted as an expert marksman, but I'd be lying if I said his quirk didn't help with his aim during his fight. It's stated by Mustard himself that he can tell where someone is if they're within the gas he creates, and I'm all but positive this helps his aim. Speaking of aiming, let's talk about his weapon. Mustard is the only villain within the league that uses a long-ranged weapon in order to supplement his lack of strength or speed. Overall, Mustard was used for his Haxed quirk and was likely never meant to be in combat, and once he was, he lost to two 1B students. Next is Spinner and Magni, both having pretty similar stats along with better feats. Now, the Wild Pussycats are mainly a search and rescue unit, but as we've seen from the provisional license exams, just being a pro hero means you have some pretty good combat skills and impressive abilities. Both Mandalay and Tiger are able to react and fight against the two villains, with Tiger easily able to dodge and punch a 5% Izuku earlier in the same arc. This same Tiger is on even ground with Magni, who's able to, in his own words, read and predict his cat-like moves. While Mandalay doesn't have much scaling to her name, she's likely within the same general league as Tiger, which is supported by the fact that Spinner has the same speed as Magni. As we saw though, without Izuku's interference, Mandalay would have gotten tagged and likely unalived by Spinner, and the Lizard Man didn't even seem that tired or beaten up. This proves Mandalay is likely weaker and slower than Tiger. That or Spinner is just that much faster and dexterous than her. Either way, this puts Spinner and Magni in about the same tier with their physical abilities. However, there is one thing Spinner has that Magni doesn't. The one thing that separates Magni and Spinner would be Spinner's use of knives and blades. Magni is definitely more of a brawler type, meaning she indefinitely has to get into close quarters combat, while Spinner could just run away and continue throwing his knives at her. And even if Magni were to get close to Spinner, we've seen that he's a rather slippery combatant. In later fights, and even with Mandalay, we see he does several spins and flips, constantly weaving around his enemies in order to make an opening and slice through them. Especially once Spinner drops his absurdly heavy duct tape together mega sword, he seems to excel at using his dexterity in fights. Magni would likely perform far better than Mandalay, and the fight between her and Spinner would be close, but I believe Spinner would take the W with high difficulty. His speed and better fighting style would simply outweigh Magni's brute strength. However, brute strength doesn't quite cut it when it comes to insane speed. This can be summed up in none other than our next combatant. Next up in C tier would be Toga. Now, I know this may be hard to hear. Yes, your favorite anime waifu is only in 8th place. While she's pretty low in the ranking, Toga is still a monster in her own right. Just allow me to prove she belongs here. The villainess is shown to be more of a spy or reconnaissance type character, often showing her expertise in stealth, such as when she quickly got away during the overhaul arc, or was able to sneak up on Deku as Cammy. She most often relies on this stealth or the surprise her targets experience once she reveals herself, in conjunction with her speed to off her opponents. And let's talk about Toga's speed, which is no joke. Toga was able to blitz and nearly stab Izuku before being captured by Aizawa, only for her to, in an instant, grab his cloth and get behind him. This feat shows not only her split-second reaction time, but also her mad technical skills. This same Aizawa was able to react to a point-blank blast from Dobby, as well as able to contend with Shigaraki while heavily fatigued. He's also able to keep up with, if not slightly outspeed, an 8% Deku, who scales roughly to Bakugo, who we've already seen could keep up with Toga, Spinner, and Compress earlier in the Hideout raid arc. Overall, Toga is a speed demon later on, but her attack potency isn't all that overwhelming. She mainly uses a knife to inflict wounds on her targets, which works perfectly when her targets are off guard or when they're slower than her. But even Aizawa and an 8% Deku would have been too much for her, which is why she retreated. And against everyone above her, Toga's speed and knife wouldn't be able to do much. Coming in at number 7 is Muscular, whose power and speed are absolutely off the charts. This guy was easily able to blitz and break a 5% Deku's arm with a single punch, going so fast that Deku could hardly even react. He was also able to tank a 100% punch from Deku, being able to react to this punch as well, which should put his speed into perspective. I'm not sure what else there is to say. This guy is just a complete monster, and I doubt Toga would be able to do lethal damage to him before he used his quirk and smashed her to pieces. She's likely to get a slash or two off before dying, but it is possible she'd be able to get his blood and transform into him. However, even in that instance, Muscular would likely be able to do enough damage that she'd be knocked back into her base form, or he'd just be able to outlast her transformation. Regardless, Muscular is solidly in 7th place, with an arguable place at 6th. Speaking of 6th, we come to everyone's favorite all-powerful cannibal, Moonfish. Early on, this dentist's worst nightmare is talked up by Compress, him having done crimes so heinous they can't even be mentioned. Now, he may not have a whole lot of punching power, but Moonfish is shown reacting to and nearly hitting Shoto and Bakugo, who, mind you, one of which goes on to take Compress, Spinner, and Toga all at once. Yes, Bakugo was nerfed since he couldn't use his explosions, but Shoto was getting completely destroyed, and even Bakugo was having a hard time tracking the man. Unlike Muscular, Moonfish is arguably going all out all the time. He doesn't care about a good fight and doesn't hold back. Arguably, him having to focus on his mission and not kill Bakugo nerfed him during the forced raid arc. Many people will bring up Dark Shadow as an anti-feat, but, and hold on to your seats for this one, I think Dark Shadow is actually stronger than Muscular. Okay, so I'm pretty sure we never see Dark Shadow itself get stronger. Instead, we see Tokoyami improve his control over the demon, slowly being able to draw out and use its power, much like how Deku does. That said, Dark Shadow during that scene is at 100% full power and is able to break through Moonfish's teeth like they were nothing. And mind you, these same teeth were slicing through Shoto's ice like butter. Now to further prove my point, I'll need to go into some brief manga spoilers, skip 5 or 10 seconds forward about now. So Dark Shadow takes on Redestro, and we all know how strong that guy is, and if you need me to prove he's stronger and faster than Muscular, then you're crazy. Anyways, Dark Shadow takes him on just fine, them being even in strength. This is further confirmed when said character only loses due to their prosthetic. Anyways, yeah, Moonfish is able to take a single hit from a Berserk Dark Shadow before being taken out by being rammed through several trees. Overall, Moonfish has the durability to take a couple hits from Muscular, the speed to keep up, and his tooth durability to go toe-to-toe with the Brute. So C tier goes like this: Toga in 8th, Muscular 7th, and Moonfish in 6th. Toga could potentially take on Muscular if she catches him off guard or sneaks around him, but it's pretty likely she doesn't. It's also possible that if Muscular goes 100% from the very start, that Moonfish would lose, but in character, this is how I see the fights going. Next up in B tier would be Mr. Compress and Twice. This might be a bit controversial, but Compress takes this due to his mad speed and hacked quirk that likely ignores all durability. During the overhaul arc, Compress is able to blitz over and touch the Yakuza boss, and before you say overhaul wasn't looking, this dude literally puts his arms up to block Compress. Clearly, he was paying attention. Overhaul is able to react to and contend with a 20% Deku and full power Lemillion, who both have feats far above that of Toga, and both should be able to react to Muscular. This same Overhaul is able to take a few punches from both Deku and Lemillion, who are able to, in the manga, take care of several near high-end Nomu. That means Lemillion is near Endeavor levels of strength, which is just insane to think about. But why do I bring this up? Well, when Compress goes to use his quirk in the anime, we see Overhaul's skin begin to slightly morph, which means if Compress didn't get hit by the erasure bullets, despite Overhaul's durability, it would have worked. That means against Muscular and Moonfish that Compress should be able to use his quirk on them successfully. The Mad Magician is also able to outrun Shoto in the Forced Raid arc, who scales roughly to Bakugo and Deku, and most of all, Compress was able to fight Gigantomachia alongside the other members of the League and survive. Yes, it's likely Machia was holding back, but his attacks even then were casually destroying the environment around him and flinging Shigaraki high into the air. That said, I don't believe Compress would be able to survive more than one attack from Moonfish or Muscular, but what he would be able to do is react to them. With his ability to nearly blitz Overhaul and keep up with Machia, Compress may not be able to outspeed Muscular, but it looks like he'd at least be able to react and dodge them, meaning he could use his compressed boulders or ice to retaliate. He could also just reach out and compress Muscular or Moonfish outright. Either way, Compress is fast, and with his quirk, he'd stand a chance against everyone beneath him, but his opponent in this tier also has a hacked quirk. Up next in the number 4th spot is none other than Twice. Twice is able to react to and dodge both Shoto's ice and fire, showing his speed is rather insane. But what's more insane is his clone generation. In the manga, you may want to skip 10 seconds here, he can create clones faster than Hawks can use his feathers. That's absolutely insane. That means his clone generation is nearly on par with the speed of people like Endeavor. Kind of. Either way, Sadman's Parade makes clones at an insanely quick pace, which means even if he were attacked, he'd have a shield of clones. And then there's all the clones that he'd have behind himself, and within seconds he would just have an army smothering Compress, Muscular, or anyone who doesn't straight up pierce through all his clones. You may be able to argue he got stronger after MVA with his clone generation, but there's not much to support that. Although I am willing to admit that it's possible Compress could blitz over and compress not only Twice, but all his clones. It's also possible Moonfish could pierce through all of Twice's clones and hit Twice himself, but if that was the case, you would have thought that the other guy would have done that. Anyways, it's a little contentious there. Back to Compress and why they're both in B tier and could arguably be switched around. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed, but when Twice is making his clones, they're momentarily all stuck together by this weird goo they're made of. If Twice is still connected to his clones, it may be possible that Mr. Compress could use his quirk on the whole mass of Twices there, and boom. But if you don't think that's possible, then Compress loses mid to high diff. Now up to A tier, with a rather controversial and hard to scale triple threat. Coming in at third place is Kurogiri. Now, while he does get tagged pretty often, it's almost always when he isn't looking, such as during USJ. And next is when he's captured against Gran Torino. Now, Great Value Yoda is no joke, he's a complete speed demon. He's said to move faster than the eye can see, and while I wouldn't believe this statement, it is backed up by the fact that Dobby couldn't react to him during the Hideout raid arc. Gran Torino also has a speed stat comparable to Stain, who, when not holding back, was able to pull out his sword, run over to Kurogiri, cut him, lick the blood, before running over to Shigaraki and doing the same without either of them being able to register he even moved, moving faster than the eye can see. Later on, when Kurogiri is captured by him, the villain is able to react to an attack from the hero, showing he's clearly gotten a bit faster, if not in only reaction time. This same Gran Torino being one of the few people able to keep up with the fight between All Might and All for One, him actually being confident enough in his speed to think he could hit All for One, only being countered by a Haxed power similar to Kurogiri's. That said, the Purple Mist monster is slower than Torino, but just being able to see the hero coming proves he'd likely be able to keep up with speedsters like Toga and Compress, and could likely react to monsters like Muscular and Moonfish. His quirk is also Haxed, with him being able to remove anyone he wants from the battlefield simply by opening a portal in front of himself. He could also close said portals while his target is inside of them in order to end them then and there, as they likely ignore durability, as he was confident he could split All Might in half. Anyways, yeah, this seriously underpaid villainous nanny is a monster, and I'm glad I could show that off here. Next up is Dobby, and well, he's basically only scalable with manga spoilers, but before that, let's talk about him prior. While not taking them seriously at all, Dobby was able to waltz around the forest camp and nearly kill both Aizawa and Vlad. Later on in the second My Hero movie, we see Dobby and Endeavor clash momentarily, with the hero having to use a prominence burn just to overpower said flames. This means Dobby's flames likely scale to, if not slightly overpower, Endeavor's, which is insane when you think about what he did to Hood, and proves Dobby would likely cremate or seriously injure any villain beneath him, aside from maybe Muscular. This proves Dobby has a pretty impressive reaction time and attack speed when compared to even top-tiered heroes, but his scaling gets absolutely insane once we get to the manga. Okay, I'll likely put up a timestamp on screen if you want to skip Dobby's scaling, but here we go. Alright, so in the war arc, Dobby reveals his identity to Endeavor and chooses to fight both him and Shoto. By this time, Shoto has learned how to fight and move faster due to Endeavor's training, and while the hero hopeful isn't necessarily on the same exact level as his father, he's pretty close, which is implied by the Endeavor training arc. Shoto is implied to be close to Bakugo and Deku's level, being in the same league as he's widely considered to be one of the big three. Not to mention, narratively, he's constantly compared to them as well, and his feats during this war arc seem to support this fact. Shoto is able to keep up with and react to attacks from a severely weakened Shigaraki, even being able to tag Shigaraki later, along with Nejire. The same Nejire being roughly in the same league as people like Lemillion, who we discussed a little earlier, was destroyed by Dobby, who was able to contend with and outspeed Shoto with his Jetfire Fist. Dobby then later reveals he could use a prominence burn, which just sends chills down my spine thinking about that attack and what it would have done if it got off. Speaking of flames, Shoto also confirms that Dobby's are stronger than both his and Endeavor's in the same fight. Either way, Dobby has some serious speed and attack potency, being able to keep up with an overpowered Shoto. This puts him easily on the same level as people such as Moonfish and Muscular, if not a level above, such as Stain and Gran Torino, with his flames easily being able to melt through buildings and high-end Nomu. Honestly, if Kurogiri didn't have mad hacks, I'd put Dobby as S tier, but oh well. Now, for our final contestant, Shigaraki. Now, what can I say about this man's? Many people tend to downplay Shigaraki, saying he's fodder and is generally lacking in power during his first few appearances, but I'd say even during USJ, we could make a case for him contending with some of the people in C tier. During that fight, he's able to keep up with and overpower a fatigued Aizawa, giving him a run for his money. Later on, he's able to speed blitz Izuku, Froppy, and Mineta, and would have finished them if it weren't for All Might. Later on, during the overhaul arc, Shigaraki is able to nearly blitz said Yakuza, and his quirk has progressed to the point that he can decay a whole person in seconds. As stated, earlier overhaul scales to people like Mirio and a 20% Deku who scale to high ends, so even here Shiggy is proving to be a bit of a monster. Later on, after fighting Gigantomachia, which is a feat in its own, Shigaraki is able to take on armies of people with his new AoE decay. During that same arc, he, or his clone I should say, is able to fight toe-to-toe with Redestro, who's casually wiping the other members of the league and destroying chunks of the building they're in with just his arm. Later on, Redestro is able to catch a nearly blitzed Shigaraki with his 80% stress form, only for the villain to have this sort of awakening where he gets a mental and physical amp, with even Redestro noting Shigaraki has gotten faster and now wastes no movements. This allows Shigaraki to outmaneuver and outspeed Destro, being able to perfectly react to him even when in his 150% stress mode, which should increase his speed. Either way, Destro is shown to be casually blowing up buildings and just the general landscape with both his punches and stress bombs, clearly being on a level above that of people like Muscular, if only by a bit. His speed is also nothing to scoff at, him easily outspeeding a Shigaraki who should be comparable if not faster than Overhaul, who could hit people like Rappa, who scale to people like Toga and Muscular. Overall, Shigaraki's speed is easily on par with the top tiers in this verse, even before his operation, and is an absolute beast within the league, only possibly losing to people with hacks or insane firepower. That said, one thing I have to bring up is Shiggy's ability to decay Redestro's stress. And no, not his body, I'm talking about those big balls of stress energy he shoots out towards Shigaraki. The way I see it is this: either Shigaraki can decay energy, or he can decay energy if it's tied to someone's quirk. So that means it's possible, just possible, that he could decay Dobby's fire, cause what is fire if not energy? So here's how A tier goes. Third is Kurogiri with his Haxed quirk carrying him this far, with Dobby and Shigaraki coming in at a close second and third. Their speeds are too similar for me to really call who would win here, since Dobby can use his flames to keep Shiggy from touching him, and can also fly. Overall, Dobby is a perfect counter to Shigaraki, but it's possible his flames could get hard countered by Shigaraki's decay quirk, so I'll leave it up to you guys. Who would win in this situation? Personally, I think Dobby would come in second, but with high difficulty. If you guys enjoyed this little power scaling trip, I'd really appreciate it if you decayed that like button. And if you didn't, feel free to leave a comment about how Toga solos everybody because she is your favorite anime waifu. Anyways, that's where we'll be leaving it for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed this different type of video. I've been trying to script and write it for like a month now, so I hope you did enjoy it. And my what ifs won't be going anywhere at all. It's just I wanted to do something a little different from the usual, and I do want to start getting into more power scaling and discussions during 2022, but I'm definitely not leaving my what ifs behind at all. So yeah, You guys have a good day or night wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye bye.